Hello, my name is Rolanda Ellis Hill, and I currently serve as the Assistant Dean for Counseling, Psychological, and Access Services here at Cuyahoga Community College. Today, I will be talking to you about our Federal TRIO Programs Priority 2, specifically speaking to budget management and the statutory and regulatory requirements for operation of projects funded under federal TRIO programs. Specifically, I will be speaking to Student Support Services and McNair Scholars. As we take a look at regulations and legislations for any TRIO program, it is imperative that any project manager is well versed on not only their program, their plan of operation, but also the legislation and the regulations that govern all TRIO programs. It is imperative that you remember that there is a hierarchy of authority when we're looking at those legislation, regulations, and policies and procedures that govern all TRIO programs. As you take a look at this pyramid, you'll see at the top we have legislation. Legislation outweighs everything. When we speak to legislation, we are speaking to the Higher Education Opportunity Act, which was recently reenacted on October 14th, 2008. It reauthorized the Higher Education Act of 1965 as amended under the Higher Education Act. This 432-page document outlined the law that was enacted by Congress. Therefore, when we speak to legislation, we're speaking to HEOA. It also reflected the most current congressional philosophical viewpoints. So when you look at our most recent version of HEOA, you'll see that they emphasize serving participants with a high risk for academic failure. For Student Support Services and McNair programs, we were looking mostly at our homeless and our foster youth who have aged out of the foster care system, in addition to disconnected youth. When we speak to program regulations, we are talking about the Education Department General Administrative Regulations, better known as EDGAR. EDGAR outlines exactly what SSS and McNair was meant to accomplish. When you look at the organization of regulations, we see that Section 46.1 describes what Student Support Services does, and with McNair, we have 6.47. McNair and Student Support Services kind of parallel when you look at the regulations. So when I speak to one, I would only make a difference when there's a difference between that which is described for Student Support Services and that which is described for the McNair program. So in addition to what Student Support Services does in McNair, it also speaks to who is eligible for a grant as well as who is eligible to participate within those programs. As you look further into the regulations, they get into the activities and the services that a project can provide. This is a very important area as it relates to the budget of any program, as well as understanding how long our project period is, what regulations apply, and what definitions apply. Looking specifically at documentation of services, we see that Student Support Services has activities which are outlined as something that one must do. When we look at those services, we see that academic tutoring is included, as well as advice and assistance in post-secondary course selection. In addition, Student Support Services programs look at the full range of federal student aid programs and assist students in completing financial aid applications, including the free application for federal student aid. This is important that you are able to state to your institution and those with whom you work exactly the purposes of the program. One will find that sometimes you may be in conflict with some of the other services enacted on campus, but you can always document that you, under the HEOA, you are designed to work with students in specific ways. In addition to those services that one must provide, including the education and counseling of students and assistance in helping students to enroll in four-year institutions, there are also permissible student support services activities. These activities include individualized counseling for personal, career, and academic matters, information, activities, and instructions designed to acquaint students participating in the projects with a range of career options, exposure to cultural events and academic programs not usually available to disadvantaged students, as well as mentoring programs involving faculty or upper class students, or a combination thereof. I mentioned these services because as you look at your budget, you'll find that all services need to be documented to count. So one saying that you hear in TRIO is if it isn't documented, it didn't happen. So when we talk about working with a budget, for everything you utilize grant funds for, it has to be documented. So not only do they tell you exactly what it is you can do, the regulations outline those services or those allowable costs. So when we look at student support services, we see that the cost of remedial and special classes are included, courses in the English language for those students who have limited English proficiencies. Also, in-serving training of project staff, activities of academic and cultural nature, such as field trips, special lectures, symposiums, and what they all have the purpose of improving a participant's academic progress and personal development. Included in allowable costs are also transportation of participants and staff to and from approved educational and cultural sponsored activities sponsored by the project, as well as purchasing of computer hardware, software, and other equipment to be used for student development, student records, and project administration. Lastly, we also have to look at professional development and travel for staff and understand that only that travel that is directly related to the project's overall purpose and activities are allowable. When you look at a student support services, it's important that you remember that only travel can be taken that does not exceed 4% of total project salaries. So specific to student support services is a limit on the amount of money that can be used for employee travel. In addition to travel, we have project evaluation that is directly related to assessing the project's impact on student achievement and improving the delivery of services. When we talk about our allowable costs, there are often times where you may need to document or provide an explanation to your program manager to get certain costs accounted for. When you are seeking to request permission, it's important that you use the regulations to provide justifications for activities and travel for your students. As we look at allowable costs, it's also important for a project manager to be aware of unallowable costs. So when we look at section 646.31, we see that certain costs are defined as being unallowable. Those costs include recruiting students for enrollment at the institution, tuition, fees, stipends, and other forms of direct financial support for staff or participants, research not directly related to the evaluation or improvement of the project, as well as construction, renovation, or remodeling of any facilities. As a former SSS project director, I found that as the director, it was important for you to understand the legs and the regs and to be an advocate and to be responsible that you are utilizing your TRIO funds appropriately. Oftentimes, I found it necessary to be able to speak with those within the institution and explain why I was able to use certain funds a certain way or why I was not able to use certain funds. When you look at other allowable SSS costs, we see that the cost of remedial and special classes is allowable, as well as in-serving training and activities of the academic and cultural nature. Looking at student support services, it's important that you understand that while travel to and from academic places such as universities and colleges and cultural places are allowable for student support services program, overnight stay is not. So one thing I do want to mention is that when you're dealing with student support services, it's important that you're able to be strategic in how you use your budgeted funds. Many student support services programs may have institutional funds that are available to them. So understanding which funds are allowable and unallowable will help you to better plan how you're able to accomplish many things for your program. One specific example that I want to speak to is when we talk about travel. So if you have students and you want to take them on an overnight trip, you're not allowed to use any of your grant money to spend an overnight trip. But if you, that would be that you would plan that you would use some of the costs that were allowable, such as actually interest to a special, let's say, museum, and use that non-grant funds for the overnight stay. And describing or seeking permission from your program officer to do such things, again, I have to stress that you should use your regs and legs to speak to why, to justify why such a trip is necessary. So you would speak to how it would enable you to actually play out some of the services you are required to provide for your students. Speaking to McNair, they also have required services. So whereas Student Support Services deals with students at the undergraduate level, McNair, they deal with undergraduates, but their goal is to get the student through a doctoral program. So you'll see that their required services differ. Looking at the services listed under 6.47.4, we see that opportunities for research or other scholarly activities tops the list. We also see summer internships, seminars, and other educational activities designed to help prepare the students for doctoral studies. In addition, they share the goal of providing tutoring, academic counseling, and activities designed to assist students in participating in the project and securing admissions to and financial assistance for enrollment in graduate programs. In addition to required services, McNair also has permissible services. These are services that you may provide, but you are not required to provide. And they are listed under 6.74, but under the B section. And they are education or counseling services designed to improve financial and academic literacy of students, mentoring programs involving faculty members at institutions of higher education or students or any combination of such persons, exposure to cultural events and academic programs not usually available to disadvantaged students, as well as all other activities designed to meet the purposes of the McNair program as outlined under section 6.47.1. As we talked about the services, we always have to speak about the allowable costs. So when we look at McNair, allowable costs include activities of academic and of the academic and scholarly nature, such as trips to institutions of higher education offering doctoral programs, and special lectures, symposia, and professional conferences, which have as their purpose the encouragement and preparation of project participants for doctoral studies. McNair is allowed to provide stipends of up to $2,800 per year for students to engage in research internships, to provide that student who has completed their sophomore year of study at an eligible institution before the internship begins. Also, necessary tuition, room and board, and transportation for students engaged in research internships during the summer is allowable. Lastly, purchase, lease, or rental of computer hardware, software, and other equipment, service agreements for such equipment, and supplies for participant development, project administration, or project record keeping. Again, I must stress that it is up to the project director to be the one who understands exactly which costs are permissible or allowable and which costs are unallowable. So when we look at unallowable costs, that would include, for McNair, payment of tuition, stipends, test preparation and fees, or other forms of student financial support to staff or participants not expressly allowed under section 747.3. And again, that includes construction, renovation, and remodeling of any facilities. Again, if I were to give advice, the number one thing I would see is you have to know the laws and regulations that govern your program and be able to speak to them specifically, because documentations of the regulations should occur in your budget book and should be cited when you're making requests of your program officer. As a summary, if I were to say, you look at a student support services program, a McNair program, I would say it would be wise to use a budget book to track all of your program spending. This is in addition to whatever your institution offers, because it's imperative that you provide documentation. And when we speak to documentation, we are speaking receipts, sign-in sheets, and explanations that include the use of the legislation and regulation that governs that cost and or that activity. In addition to utilizing a budget book to track all program spending, it is imperative that it correlates to what's recorded in your database and your files. Another tidbit I would offer is to utilize the regulations to make requests to your program officer. So whenever you have something that may be a little iffy and you want to get clarification of the program officer, it is to your benefit to be able to utilize the regulations, legislation, to be able to speak to why you're asking or you're requesting that permission. And in the end, as the program director, it is imperative for you to educate your institution when there is a conflict with institutional requests and program requirements. You are in a partnership and your institution is sponsoring you. So if it's ever a time where you have to explain why you can't do anything, you should be able to document it by that which is included in the legislation and the regulations. If you have any questions or need to contact Tri-C, you can contact Nichelle Knox with all questions at nichelle.knox@tri-c.edu. Thank you.